If you have your handout, the first thing we talk about there is good speeches are written, killer keynotes are designed and crafted. First of all, what's a killer keynote? A killer keynote is a really nice alliteration that simply means a keynote that is effective. Okay? You can get up and talk for 30 minutes, say whatever you want. In terms of the length, it qualifies as a keynote, right? It's a keynote speech. But is it really doing the work a keynote should be doing? So we'll talk about definitions really quickly. What is a keynote supposed to do? According to the definition I found on Merriam-Webster, it says an address designed to present the issues of primary interest to an assembly, such as a political convention, and often to arouse unity and enthusiasm. So when you think about a keynote, think about it musically. It strikes a key note. What is the key note of the event? So think about something like the DNC, the Democratic National Convention of the United States, right? Big event, right? There was a keynote that was given there in 2004 that made a young, unlikely candidate president 4 years later. That was the keynote. The keynote of that DNC was Obama's speech that you've all probably heard, right? The speech about there is no white America, there's no United States of America, and all that stuff. So that was the keynote, the Democratic National Convention. If you listen to the keynote of the Republican National Convention, though, it's very different. Because it's a different set of people, different set of values, different set of interests. I, for the life of me, do not know who gave the keynote there. He did not become president or she did not become president, so I didn't care. But the point is, different audiences, different events require different keynotes. And if you're thinking about going professional, understanding what a keynote does is important because that will determine whether, first of all, you get the gig or not, and second of all, whether you do a good job or not. So the first thing I want to think about when you think about keynotes is design. Design. What does a keynote do? What is your keynote supposed to do? And it's a radical shift in how we design speeches, because we think about speeches as, oh, this is how a speech should sound. No, no, no. This is what a speech should do. It's doing work, okay? First thing. If you look at the first couple of blanks on there, it says a well-crafted keynote should do four things. Four things. Four things I'm going to do. Well, quickly before we go further, I'm just going to give you an idea of what this keynote, what this breakout is going to cover. We'll cover these four things and we'll dive into the actual anatomy, clever, nice word, of a keynote. The three parts, really, that I think every good keynote, a killer keynote should have. So what are the four things a keynote should do? Now, you're all Toastmasters. You've been in Toastmasters for at least a few months, as I checked earlier. You know the answer already. These are the four basic types of speeches we all give in Toastmasters. What's the first one? Anybody know? Inform. To inform, and I'll address that. But note that, inform, Entertain. Entertain. We have a manual for that. What's the other one? Persuade. Persuade. Last one? Inspire. Thank you, Nandini. So we have inform, entertain, persuade, and inspire. Right? A good keynote does all four. And that's why it's a little bit more complex. Right? You're not doing one thing, you're doing all four when you do the keynote. So you must not inform. This is where I want to maybe deviate a little bit. You must educate. And there's a difference between education and informing. Tony's nodding. Yeah, he gets it. There's a difference between educating and informing. I can throw facts at you. I've informed you. But you shift to education when you start to get people to change. And that's a big part of persuasion, right? Big difference. Okay, you entertain. It's unfortunate, but in the world today, people aren't patient anymore. People don't like if you just stand up here and just talk and talk and talk and you're not entertaining. You need to be entertaining in the keynote. If you're gonna be talking for more than 7 minutes, you need to be entertaining. Otherwise, people are gonna switch off. You've all been in that room with that person who gave a speech and 7 minutes felt like 7 hours, right? You look at the time, it was 6:45, and an hour later, it was 6:46, right? You know what that's like, so don't be that kind of person, okay? And then persuade. You must persuade. Your keynote means nothing if people don't change. That's what I believe. If they can't go as far as changing their behavior, at least change their mind a little. Get them thinking differently. And I think you should inspire people with a keynote. Because if they don't believe they can do what you're asking them to do, then what's the point? Right? What's the key idea? The key idea is this. Persuasion and inspiration is the goal. Education and entertainment are the tools. I want you to take that mindset when you design a keynote. The goal is to persuade and inspire. The tools are education and entertainment. So every piece of content you bring, whether it's a statistic, a story, a case study, an anecdote, a joke, everything is driving you in the direction of persuading and inspiring your audience. Remember, within the context of the keynote. Is that making sense so far? Any questions about that? I know you're probably asking, great, Anthony, but how? We'll get into it. So can we move on? Okay, thank you. All right then, so the body parts, the anatomy of a killer keynote. Now, first of all, I'm gonna say right now that you might not like everything that I say, and that's fine, all right? If you disagree with what I've said, that's fine too. Because part of being an effective keynote speaker, and this is a mindset that we all have to change, is you have to believe enough in your message to say it. And accept that not everybody's gonna accept it, especially if you want to be a professional. Because you can't just blend in with everybody else as a professional, you will just dissolve, right? Like salt in water. So if I say something that you don't necessarily agree with, I ask that you maybe just don't yell at me or throw food at me. But you can talk to me later, maybe I said it wrong, maybe I can clarify. But accept also that that's part of the way it goes. We all have so many different opinions. We can't all be right all the time. Okay, so head. A good keynote must have a good head on its shoulder. What does that mean? Have you ever heard a speech being delivered and you found a fundamental problem with the reasoning of the speech? Shoot your hand up. Like there's just something fundamentally wrong with the entire, thank you, Marvin, with the entire premise of the speech. Somebody comes up and says to you, the key to success is hard work. And that's the entire premise for that speech. Well, you know, I don't think Paris Hilton works very hard. I don't think so. Right? She was born into a rich family. But again, what is success? So there's a fundamental problem with the premise of that speech. Is first of all, it doesn't tell me what success means. And then it makes a broad generalization to say hard work. Gardeners work very hard. I've worked manual labor job when I was in school. I worked hard, but I didn't have a Lamborghini. I rode a bicycle. Do you see what I mean? So to tackle the problem of a good, we'll look at it under two headings. A good head. The first thing is it must have clear logic and reasoning. And I know we talk so much about, oh, emotions move people. It's not entirely true. The more research has shown us that the more invested your audience is in a subject, the more you need reason to convince them. So if you're talking to a sophisticated audience of Toastmasters about public speaking, your reasoning better be good, because they know this subject. So it's not enough to just come up here and think like you can just tell a few wishy-washy stories and people are just gonna follow you wherever you lead. It's not true, it doesn't work that way. So your logic better be clear, okay? The second part is insight and intrigue. What does that mean? You can say the same thing, but you need to share insight. What does insight mean? Seen from the inside of the subject. Anybody here do organic chemistry in school? Anybody do any science in school? Did you feel like it was a hard shell going in? Like you're trying to break through rock. But then once you are on the inside of the subject, everything kind of looked clearer looking outside. That's the work we must all do if we're going to be successful keynote speakers. We must do the work of getting inside our subject, whatever we're talking about, so we can give the audience insight. So we can't be lazy thinkers. The keynote speech cannot be lazy, cannot be just on the surface. Okay? So those are the two levels. So what we're going to do now, remember when I told you about your neighbor, how your neighbor is kind of important? We're going to take 2 minutes. And I'll give you the first minute to just think about whatever keynote it is you're either working on or hope to work on. And ask yourself 2 questions. Number 1, is my logic and my reasoning clear? And have I actually checked it out? And number 2, is there anything insightful about what I have to say? Or am I just going to say the same old thing that everybody knows the same old way? Is that clear, those instructions? So take about a few seconds and just think about your speech. A speech you're giving or a speech you plan to give, and ask yourself, do I really have any insight? And it's okay to say no. It just means that you have a little more work to do. Nothing wrong with a little work, right? So I'll give you 30 seconds to do that. And then when you're done thinking, you'll use that space in that handout you have there and just make a few notes. And I'll tell you what to do after that. You're going to talk to your neighbor about it real quick. But by yourself? Are you by yourself? Oh, a partner, yeah, you can talk to him. Talk to him. Okay, thank you everyone. All right. Chatty Toastmasters, bring it back, bring it back, bring it back. Ever so slowly. All right then. So let's just gather our thoughts. Let's gather ourselves back. The last group to stop talking gets to share what they talked about. And that's you people at the back. Excellent. So, you want to tell us what came out of your conversation real quickly? Anybody can volunteer. Do you need the mic, maybe? Yes, no? Maybe? Yeah? Okay.
And for me, it doesn't really depend on what the subject is, as long as I'm passionate about it. But what I want to do is just add more spice, more intrigue.
Okay.
And like what you said on the number 2, just more insight, more intrigue.
Okay. All right. Thanks for that. What's your name?
Dinesh.
Dinesh. Okay. Thanks, Dinesh. Oh, thanks, John. Okay. So Dinesh wants to add more insight and more intrigue to his content. Anybody come up with more topical, like more subject-related change that they want to make? Maybe related to your specific subject. Nothing? I had a feeling that would happen. So we'll talk about 2 headings now. Because the reason I asked that is because it's tempting again to stay up here, right? It's very easy. This is where it's easy at. This is where every other speaker is at. You want to go here. So you can't stay here and, oh yeah, did you have something to say?
Yeah. For me, I think the most important thing is also what we know. Is knowing your topic inside out.
Sorry, did you say that again?
How to announce your keynote speech is knowing your topic inside out and knowing your audience very, very well.
Okay, again, very general, very general. Thank you for that, but I must call you out on that. Very general, knowing your topic inside out. How do you know I know my topic inside out? How do you know that, right? I may know it like the back of my hand, but if I can't communicate that with an insight, yawn, okay? So let's look at two things you can look at right away. Right away, two specific things you can look at to help you gain insight into your topic. Number one, questions of definition. And that's really important. Questions of definition, right? For example, the example I gave you, hard work leads to success. What is hard work? What is success? That's an insight right there. So if you can look at the definitions of the content, you will start to gain insight quickly. I gave a speech one time when I talked about the difference between sight and vision. And I knew that that's a tricky subject, like sight and vision. What does that mean? So I had to define sight as physical sight and define vision as vision. Now we have somewhere to start from, right? It's really basic, but a lot of speakers don't even do that. You don't define the terms you're using sometimes. I'm not saying define everything. Shoe is shoe, nobody cares. But the key things in your speech, you need to define them. And the second is the question of premise. Premise. Premise is so crucial. I won't talk too much. I want to play a sample for you from one of the most sought after motivational keynote speakers in the world. His name is Les Brown, if you know who he is. And I want you to hear how he sets up his premise very brilliantly with his audience right from the top. I hope you can hear it. Let me just open it up here. Leslie Brown. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Can you hear it?
Let's give Scott a tremendous round of applause for a great job he just did. Give Scott a round of applause, if you please. How many have major goals you'd like to achieve? Raise your hands, please. Major goals you'd like to achieve. Fantastic. Shake someone's hand on your right and left. Look them in the eyes and say, you have something special. You have greatness within you. Do that right now, please.
And it gives you time, right, to do it.
Very good. I like to ask audiences how many have major goals you'd like to achieve. And I want to ask you another question, because I've been reflecting on this. Last year I had a reoccurrence of the little c, cancer. 15 years ago I was diagnosed with prostate cancer and given a 2 to 3 year prognosis. One of the things I think that doctors should never tell someone they're terminally ill. What they should say is, my knowledge and ability to help you has terminated. But I've been reflecting on my life, and I want to ask you, and I know you've done things you feel good about, things that you're proud of, but how many of you know, if you had your life to live over again, you could have done more than what you've done thus far? Raise your hands, please. That proves the point that what we do and what we accomplish in life is only a tip of the iceberg of what's possible for us. So I want to share some thoughts with you. I want you to think about three...
Right. Do you see what he did? What do you notice about his approach there? What's his premise? What's the foundation of all he's about to say? Christina?
That we're capable of more than we've done up to this point.
Exactly. That's the premise. So it's important that he leaves no doubt in your mind about that. He makes you say it. Right? That may not be your style. You may not say turn to your neighbor, that might not be your style. But there has to be no doubt, no ambiguity at all about the premise on which your speech is built. He said, what that proves, did you hear that language? What that proves is blank. So the logic is clear. You're not getting away from that logic, right? Very persuasive, very powerful. So again, you don't have to do exactly the way he did it, but it's important that you do it somehow, that the premise of your entire speech be clear. Let's look at an example on definitions. And I'm going to refer back to the DNC 2004. If a speech can make a person president, I mean, it didn't literally make him president, but it set him up for presidency. I'm interested to know what he said. So let's listen to Obama's speech. It's like a few seconds of it, because we can't listen to the whole thing. It's about 20 minutes long. But I want you to hear what Obama does in the speech around definition. Because talk about premise, right? Let's look at what he does around definition. You need to define things. Okay, let's listen to that one. And, okay.
They stand here, and I stand here today, grateful for the diversity of my heritage, aware that my parents' dreams live on in my two precious daughters. I stand here knowing that my story is part of the larger American story, that I owe a debt to all of those who came before me, and that in no other country on earth is my story even possible. Tonight, we gather to affirm the greatness of our nation. Not because of the height of our skyscrapers, or the power of our military, or the size of our economy. Our pride is based on a very simple premise, summed up in a declaration made over 200 years ago. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That is the true genius of America. A faith in simple dreams, an insistence on small miracles.
Right. So what did he do there?
He gave you the definition and the premise.
What's your name? Sorry?
Larry?
Thank you, Larry. Thank you so much. Definition and premise. Now, who is he talking to? Democrats. Please forget your politics for the next couple of minutes. It doesn't matter. What we're looking at here is technique. I don't care if you like Obama or hate him. He is a good speaker. Like it or not, it's objectively true. So I study him. I study Trump. I don't care for him, but he does a lot of things very interestingly. And we might talk about Trump. We'll see. But what does he do? He sets the definition. Who is he talking to? Americans. What specific subculture? Democrats. Democrats. Liberals. How does he define greatness? Based on liberal values, which is, notice what he said. He said, our greatness is not based on our economy or skyscrapers. What is that? Republican. What's he doing? Exactly. He's buttering you up. That's what he's doing. He's saying, we're not like those people. Here we believe something. And that's his premise. And that premise is what he rides as a wave for the next 17 minutes of that speech. But did you even see what he was doing? No. Because he did it so smooth, all smooth like. Now, you don't have to be like Obama, of course. But you must clarify the premise and the definitions that are key to it. Because if you had just said, America's a great nation, and then he just dives right into the dreams and whatever, people are like, yeah, but how about the economy? Yeah, but how about that, military power? How about all that stuff? No. He has to define great for you, his audience, that share that value with him. Then he can persuade you to go on. So if you haven't listened to that speech, I recommend you listen to it. It's about 17 minutes of your life. But if you use this outline to listen to that speech and any other great speech, I just really have time. Every great speech does this in some way, shape, or form. We just didn't have the filters to see it. But now that you do, you're going to start to see it a lot more. Okay? So if you're ever having problems with insight, think of your definitions and think of your premise and dive deep, dig into that. And remember, you're talking about the key notes. Strike the key notes of the interests of your audience and of the occasion. So we'll talk about rhetorical context real quick. That's not in here, but I want to just give you an idea of rhetorical context. Rhetorical context is a concept that means what is the situation around which you're speaking. And it's based on two simple things. What are those two things? You know it. One is what? What's the situation of any speech? One is what?
The audience?
What, sorry?
The audience?
The audience! Big part of a rhetorical situation. What's the other one?
Your message?
Your message, but your message is based on what? You see, that's the thing. We're looking at ourselves. Step outside yourself for a minute. What's your rhetorical situation? What's my situation now? You're my audience. What is the other thing that's affecting the situation? Why they showed up? The event. So that's the two legs of your rhetorical context, the audience and the event. And that is what determines everything you do. If you have a really, really educated audience, right? But it's an eulogy, you're giving a eulogy. you can't come up there and start talking stats and figures, right? You're gonna say he was a good man, he was a good man. Something like that, right? If you have a broad audience, say, imagine what the person had to give, what's his name? I can't remember his name now. The chief of the emergency response team after Hurricane Katrina, right? He was in a very tough rhetorical context. He had the whole nation of America, in a sense, the whole world to address, and it was a really tough situation for him. So he had to put on this persona of that context. He couldn't be telling jokes, for goodness sake, could he? Yeah, those people were overweight anyway, they needed some exercise. You couldn't say something like that. So always remember your rhetorical context for everything you do. And what is it again? The audience and the situation, the events. That'll guide your keynotes. Very, 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 very important. Okay, so we talked about the head of your keynote. What other part does your keynote need? First of all, any questions around the head of your keynote? Any questions? No? So I hope you have some more concrete. Christina, did you have a question?
Insight. That's the uniqueness that nobody else has brought forward to that audience, right?
Well, it doesn't have to be nobody else has brought forward, but it just has to be, let's just say, a little bit deeper than the top, right? And usually you can color insight with your experiences, but that's like a different subject, right? But yeah, insight is basically showing that you know the subject from the inside out, that you have depth of knowledge, and you make the audience think differently. I like to say you look for the wow or the whoa, right? If something you say makes the audience go, oh, I hadn't thought of that. Or makes them go, wow, that's amazing. I like the second one better, but even the whoa, anything that makes them pause and think again about what they thought they knew is insight. So that's how I like to think about it, the whoa or the wow. Thank you, Christina. Okay, well, let's go talk about the heart. A killer keynote must make an emotional connection. Make an emotional connection. I spent a lot of time on the head because I feel like we hear a lot of people talk about heart a lot. We learn how to make people emotionally engaged, right? We want to learn just right, the right place to pause for effect. But a lot of us don't think about the head. But we've talked about the head, so let's talk about the heart a little. There are two fundamental concepts about the heart. The first one is your overall emotional tone, right? And the second one is a range of emotion for the audience. So one is focused on you, one is focused on the audience. What is your emotional tone? It may sound fluffy, it may sound pie in the sky, but I believe you should love your audience. And what does that mean? It's not romantic love, okay? That would be logistically difficult. But it's more a sense of well-being and well-wishing for the audience. If you are not clear about your motives for getting up to give a keynote, you need to get clear. And it needs to be a positive, emotional energy that you give off. People can smell insincerity from a mile away. They've seen enough, poorly clad salesmen, they've seen enough ads on YouTube, they've seen all that stuff. They know when it's fake. They know. And if they don't, they'll find out really quickly. This guy is just up there, or this gal is up there to sell their product, or to make themselves look good, or to whatever it might be, right? Or to practice their speech, or whatever. But if there's no love in your heart for your audience, and again, I'm defining love, wink, wink, remember that? So you have to have that love, that well-wishing, that positive energy for your audience. It's really crucial. I don't want to belabor the point, but I think it's missing a lot. I've coached people who, they have their speech correct, and then I say, now sit down. Let's work on love. What is the motive? Why is this important that this message get out there? Okay? So that's the first side of emotional connection. The audience will feel it. They will know. Trust me, they will know. And you can be a really bad speaker, and they'll let you go. I was at a TED Talk in Calgary 2 or 3 years ago, and there was this guy who was talking about how he feels medical records should be made public, so that doctors have a larger pool of data to work on tough cases for. And in the middle of the speech, he got really emotional because he had gone through a hard time, and he just started crying. He was the only person to get a standing ovation that day at that conference. Go figure. The first speaker was, I was taking notes when she was talking because she was like just a pro. She was still my favorite speaker for obvious reasons, but he was the only one that got a standing ovation. because he cared so much. Now, I don't recommend you do that. You don't need to be doing therapy on stage. You can't. It's not a good look. But my point is, his motives were clear, and the audience felt it, and they rewarded him. So if you can combine that with technique, come on. All right. The second thing we'll talk about is range. Now, this range is for the audience. The audience needs emotional range. What does that mean? We can be happy. Oh, yeah. No. It's gonna be like, man, I'm exhausted. Right? We need some range. The 4 emotions I think you should hit: happy, sad, angry, hopeful. Happy, sad, angry, hopeful. Happy, sad, angry, hopeful. Why is it important? People are more engaged when their emotions are engaged. What does emotion mean? Emotion. It means motion. Right? People will move when they have emotion. People will move even better when they have a range of emotion. If you haven't read this book, I recommend you read it, The Power of Moments by Chip and Dan Heath. It talks about pretty much a formula for creating memorable moments in people's lives. And one of it is elevated emotion. Now, that doesn't mean people are falling over in their chairs and having seizures or whatever. You just need to give them some range, right? Make them happy. How can you do that? That's where the entertainment piece comes in, right? If you have something funny or just something that gives them a sense of pride, like Leslie. Did you notice what he did? He said, how many here, blah, 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 you have greatness within you, and all that. Already people are feeling lifted, they're happy. Then he challenges them, like, right away. Like, yeah, you're not doing that great, are you? So they feel a little sad, right? All within, 2 minutes? So already you felt a range of emotions within that time. Did you find that more engaging, perhaps? Maybe? So if you can, engineer emotional range into your keynote. And talk about how to make people happy, how to make people sad. Have you ever heard, shoot your hand up, let me describe it first. If you heard a speech where you left feeling kind of sorry that you went to that speech because you were just down in the dumps at the end of it, shoot your hand up if you had that, yeah? We had a speaker in our club who gave a speech. He's well known. I mean, it's not a secret. Rose Dantu gave a speech where he talked about somebody who got curb stomped. That's when you step on somebody's head on a curb. And when he did the speech the first time, he visually stomped a lot. And he got feedback saying, yeah, it's a bit much. Maybe stomp once, or maybe just talk about stomping, because that puts people in a very negative place, right? So we still get that something violent happened, but you don't kill us. So watch your emotional range. You want the range. You want people to feel happy. You want them to feel a little sad about something, right? Maybe sad about the state of affairs they're trying to change. If you listen to that speech today on Obama, he goes on to talk about how things are not, the way they could be. So give them that little bit of a low, right? And make them angry at something if you can. Not at you, hopefully, but at a situation that needs changing. So you can point the anger at that situation, make them angry about it a little bit. Here's the truth that we need to understand about persuasion. People don't change if they're comfortable. And I know that's uncomfortable to hear in Canada, where we're super nice, but people don't change as long as they're comfortable. I'm not an activist, but I know a few causes that I've ignored because it was inconvenient to listen to them. It might mean I might spend a few more dollars at the grocery store if I thought about that, and I don't want to do that. Right? Until somebody makes me uncomfortable about that truth, I'm not going to change. So if you're too busy being agreeable, well, you're going to be forgettable. So provide some emotional range. Don't be afraid to take people down a little if it's important. Don't do it just for the heck of it, for oops and giggles. No, do it because it's serving the purpose of bringing them up again to hopeful. So emotional range is really critical for successful keynote. If all you do is stats, figures, the head will just analyze, oh, that's very interesting. I hadn't thought about that. Fascinating perspective. Can we leave now and go? I'm hungry. That's all that happened, right? Without any emotion attached to it. So think about those two principles. Because our time is far spent, I won't ask you to do the exercise with your neighbor again, but do think about your keynote after today, or after this session is over. Does it have emotional range? And do you have the right emotional tone altogether for your audience? Nandini has a question.
I just have a quick question when you're talking about emotional range.
talking about emotional range, is it worthwhile to do the anger and the change early on and always end on hope? I'm just curious if there's kind of an order.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, John. So I'm not really, here's what I suggest. Okay, if you do read that book, one of the things you learn in that book is that people have selection of what they remember. They remember the beginning, they remember the end, and then there's one we don't talk about a lot in Toastmasters, and that's peaks. They remember peaks. The brain is wired to remember peaks. So if they're going to remember the beginning and the end and the peaks, here's what I try to do. I try to make people happy at the beginning, because they'll remember that happy feeling. I try to leave them with hope and inspiration at the end. And every other peak is in the middle. Right? That's a good strategy I find that works. If you're going to make them angry or sad, don't make them angry at the end. Unless you want to start a revolution. Okay? That could be helpful. Or still inspire them. We can burn down this building, say yay! All right then. All one. Okay, let's do it. Everybody got some gasoline? But that's what I suggest, okay? Give them that range of emotion, but keep the front and the back positive. I like to end on hope as much as possible. Again, don't be too theatrical about this. If there's love in your heart for the audience, this will happen. But now you have a check mark in your head and you're going through, am I really doing this? It's really important to keep in mind, right? Okay, we'll move on because of time. This is one of my favorite ones, and it's guts. So we started from the head, right? From the head, we came to the heart, and now we're at the guts. If you go down a little lower, it means the same thing. But we're keeping it PG here, so we won't do that. It still means guts, okay? A killer keynote is courageous. It is courageous. It speaks its truth without apology. Well, maybe with apology. I'm sorry to say this to you, but if you keep doing this, you're gonna fail. But what I'm saying is, it's courageous. Right? And I talked about that a little bit earlier on, especially if you want to go pro. If you want to be professional, you cannot not be courageous. The people we talk about today are a bit disruptive, let's face it, in their communication. Because the world is so noisy that if you are like everybody else, you're like everybody else. Now, there's a trap here. The trap is to be courageous and be offensive for the sake of it. No, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, if there's something about your message that maybe could offend a few people, not everybody in your audience, and you take that part out because you don't want to offend, you've watered the message down by that much. And every time you do that, it goes down. Every time you do that, it goes down until you are really forgettable. Okay? That makes sense? I told you you might not like me at some points, but So what I say is don't be so agreeable that you become forgettable. That's the key idea there. And again, it's not for its own sake. It's for the purpose of what you're trying to do. If you listen to that speech all the way to the end, Obama goes on to challenge the DNC to say, hey, we need to get up and do something, right? So he's not just like buttering them up all the way. He has an agenda. He has something he wants them to get up and change. So we're going to listen. I don't know if we have time. No, we don't have time. Okay, we won't do that. We'll see at the end if there's time. But I want to give you the two keys to being more courageous in your speech. And there's two. Number one, don't be afraid to challenge the status quo. You can't be a thought leader if you're too busy being a thought follower, okay, in your keynote. We saw a good example of that with Saya, right? Saya gave a keynote up here and she said, we don't join Toastmasters to become better Toastmasters. You might think this only applies to the big stage keynotes, whatever. No, even in a keynote, in a TLI, in a COT, it's important that you rattle people a little bit sometimes, right? Because a lot of people come to Toastmasters and they get very good at doing evaluations. They get very good at being a Toastmaster, but they never take it outside. So even that subtle message there says, don't join Toastmasters, just become a better Toastmaster. So it's challenging the status quo. The second thing I don't want you to be afraid to do is to challenge the audience's opinion. If they're there to listen to you, they've made the choice to come and listen to you. They do want to hear what you have to say. So if you have a problem, but challenge, I'm not saying be rude or disrespectful, but challenge their opinion. That's what makes for persuasion, that's what makes for a memorable and a killer keynote, the type that causes change. Any questions around that real quick? No? Okay, I know we're all adults. We know where to draw the line about being offensive or whatever. Don't be offensive, please. Be respectful, but don't be afraid either if it's going to help your subject. As we round this up, I believe I'm pretty much out of time at this point, almost. By a couple you mean 2 minutes, all right then. But before we leave, I just want to ask you real quick that I'm going to pass out my evaluation forms. Please fill them out. They help me get better. I beg you, and I'll give you 1 whole minute to do it. But as we round up, let me just leave you with this message. A good keynote is as good as the good keynote speaker. As speakers, we have a huge responsibility to effect change in the world. We do need a good head on our shoulders. We cannot be lazy in our thinking as speakers. Right? We do need a good heart as well. For the audience and for our message, we have to care enough about both to be effective. And we need guts. First of all, because it's good for digestion, but also because it gives us the core strength to stand when we have to say something that perhaps is a little bit uncomfortable, but we believe in it enough to share with the audience. So I wish you well in your keynote speaking, and in your speaking in general, and maybe one day we'll share a stage together. Maybe every day. Thank you.